Let's talk about
coming to join you.
the 5-6 Colts. They
That's
should have
Fred
gained
Sanford.
back in the AFC South with 5 to play. Colts players know that to pass the Titans 6-6 and the division-leading Houston Texans 6-5, they need a win streak. Tight end Dwayne Allen telling the Indy Star, quote, "We understand we have to run the table point blank. In order to have a realistic chance, we have to run the table." I guess I'll call you Max.
Yeah.
Will they win the division?
Yeah, I think they will. I think, I picked Andrew Luck to win the MVP before the season started, and I thought that's partly because he's on a very flawed team. They're even worse than I thought they would be. And he would somehow, through his brilliant play, elevate them. He's entering his physical prime now. He'd figure out a way by hook or by crook to get him to the playoffs, and I still think he's going to do that. He's the best player in the division. And I really believe, actually, if you equalized everything else, right? I think he's the best player in football. I can't prove it because his defense is terrible. His offensive line is no good. He doesn't really have a lot of offensive weapons. He's on one of the most talentless teams in the game. So there's no way to really prove it. But if you could give me my choice of players in the NFL, one guy, build a team around him, I'll take Andrew Luck. And when you look at the schedule, it's not exactly murderer's row. It's not a tough division. He's the best player in it. He's going to have a superhuman effort to get them there. But I think he's going to get them there, Stephen A. I think he's that special a player.
Well, Max Kellerman, you brought this on yourself. You deserve the misery associated with this when you picked Andrew Luck as your league MVP, because no one questioned the greatness of Andrew Luck. Even though he could be haphazard at times, we know it's because of the absence of protection, because Grigson still hasn't succeeded in giving him an offensive line in 5 years and all of this other stuff. We got that about Andrew Luck. The one person that was hard-headed about all of this was you, because you refused to look at the pieces around him and fully recognize what this man was working with or not working with. The Indianapolis Colts are not a very good team. Their defense is horrific. They're ranked 28th. They're ranked 30th in yards allowed. They're ranked 30th against the pass, 23rd against the run. Their offensive line is highly suspect. Their running game, even though Frank Gore is a rough rider, you know what? He's over 30. We understand there's but so much you could expect from him. So everything is on Andrew Luck and those receivers. I look at Andrew Luck, and I don't see the Colts winning the AFC South. I think even though Brock Osweiler isn't the answer, I think overall as a team, Houston is better. I think the Titans are on a come up with Mariota and the crew. Plus, they've got runners, particularly in DeMarco Murray. I've got more faith in them, and I have little to no faith in the Colts outside of Andrew Luck. So I don't see them running the table. And they're two road games at Minnesota and at Oakland. They ain't winning those games.
I don't know.
No.
I mean, Minnesota's a very tough defense, but we just got done. Let's see how Minnesota looks against Dallas, but they don't have much offense
Dallas
right now.
is different than Indy.
And Oakland has been amazing, mainly because Derek Carr, another great offensive line, by the way, and some weapons. Derek Carr comes through under pressure for them, but they haven't been outscoring opponents by a whole bunch. Their point differential doesn't say they're an elite team. Derek Carr's performance in the fourth quarter makes them an elite team, but Andrew Luck can do the same for his. If you look at the schedules, Tennessee has to play Denver and at KC. Houston has a game at Green Bay. But when you look at the Colts, at the Jets, big deal. Houston, all right, at Minnesota, we'll see what that is. You know, the Cowboys will be somewhat of a litmus test. The Cowboys should win that game. If Minnesota wins, I may reevaluate. But I don't see Minnesota as insurmountable for them. At Oakland is a tough game, but again, fundamentally, the Raiders aren't a great team. They're a good team with a great quarterback. I'm saying Andrew Luck's a great quarterback and may be able to match that. And Jacksonville, I don't see murderer's row there.
I'm not proclaiming that any of them will run the table. But at this moment, they already have an edge over Indy in the win-loss column. Yep. And I see them both, all three of them practically losing at least a couple of more games. That still gives them the edge over Indy. To me, in order for Indy to be more successful, I think over the last 5 games, they're going to have to go at least 4-1. I don't see that happening.
Let me ask you something. If Luck plays out of his mind and leads them to the playoffs, is he an MVP candidate for you?
No.
You don't think they're going to make the playoffs?
No.
You acknowledge they have no defense. You acknowledge they have no offense. But if he somehow gets them over the hump, he's still not the MVP. We're in the
Do you need
conversation.
me? I'm sorry. Are you asking me a rhetorical question that you want me to echo to the audience, or do you need to be reminded of my position myself?
Little from column A, little from column B.
I am telling you what I told you before the season began. Andrew Luck would not be an MVP candidate because his team would stink. They wouldn't make the playoffs, and everybody would be looking at Grigson and Pagano and whether or not they needed to stay, as opposed to the greatness of Andrew Luck because of the pieces around him. That's the bottom line.
Andrew Luck is in danger. You know, if they give him a defense one of these days, he can go down as one of the all-time greats, and if they don't, he's a souped-up Archie Manning.
But let's just let it go. Can we just let it go with the MVP conversation, though, for the season?
That's right.
Let's let it go. Let's just bury it.
Let it go.
Let's dead it.
Let it go.
Okay, thank you.
Dead it.
You
Dead
moved on
it.
to
Look at
that.
Molly.
No.
Look at Molly.
I'm
Dead
holding
it.
out
Is
hope.
that
Let
right?
me wait till the end
Go
of the
ahead,
season.
you.
Make the playoffs.
Excuse me.
Make the playoffs, Luck.
Excuse me.
Coming up next. Hall of Fame coach Tony Dungy has done extensive legwork in the promoting of hiring of minority coaching candidates, and he spoke on the state of coaching at a luncheon promoting NBC's partnership with Thursday Night Football, saying, quote, "So many owners don't know what they're looking for. I've talked to people who have said, recommend a coach to me. And when I say, well, what are you looking for? They say, well, I don't know. Recommend someone who is good." Very interesting. We welcome in Bill Poley into the show. Spent 7 years, of course, with Tony Dungy. Yes, won a Super Bowl together. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
We appreciate it. Help us out here. Do you think this is a reason why there's so few minority head coaches in the NFL?
No, it's one of the reasons. There's a number of reasons. On the one hand, Tony's exactly right. Owners don't know what they're looking for. On the other hand, you have agents out there who are pushing coaches and getting in league with people in the media trying to push coaches who may not even fit or even be qualified. Third, you have all kinds of speculation that takes place. The internet, for example, had a story a couple of weeks ago that Josh McDaniels was not on the list compiled by a committee that I belong to. First of all, the list hasn't been promulgated, and Josh McDaniels was on it. So it's that kind of nonsense that floats around that owners and club presidents are susceptible to. The other thing is that there is the feeling, largely I think created by the media, that you have to be a coordinator in order to be qualified to be a head coach. That's not true. In fact, there have been many head coaches, including my mentor, Marv Levy, who was not a coordinator, and good ones. So there are a number of things that are taken into consideration. Fortunately, this year we have a number of, not a great number, but a number of really good minority coaches who may be available to fill needs. But in the end, it's the owner and the people around him who make the decision. And oftentimes the football people don't have the loudest voice in the room, which is, in my opinion, a mistake.
I think it does have something to do with it for a very kind of stupid reason. And this happened, sports you would think would be run much more efficiently. But for years we see that wasn't the case. How slow was baseball to accept analytics, and now every single team relies on them heavily because they work. The early adopters of analytics and who employed them enjoyed great success and a huge advantage until the slow ones caught on, right? So it's not always run efficiently. And one of the ways I think sports is inefficient, particularly the NFL, is that people cast in their minds. So if the owners don't know what they're looking for, they cast. I want a guy, that coach is good, I want someone who reminds me of him. Go get me someone who reminds me of him. And sometimes it's as simple as that's the way they look. I really think that plays into it. They remind him of a guy who just had success. And only recently do you hear things like, hey, you know who Jameis Winston reminds me of? Ben Roethlisberger, right? Mm-hmm. And not just when you saw an African-American quarterback, another African-American quarterback, because the casting people do in their minds often is simply the way they look, and what people see oftentimes is race. So I think it's going to be an ongoing and slow process, gradual process, but the more minority, quote unquote, candidates you see and coaches you see in the league, I think that will have a kind of ripple effect in increasing the speed at which this stuff happens.
Well, I want to chime in here by first saying that, I've, for years, Max Molly, y'all may not know this, but ever since this man, Bill Polian, has been working here, it's been a treasure for me because every time I'm around him, he teaches me more and more about the game of football, and I've always appreciated that about him, and I want to thank you for being on the show. The thing that I love when I talk to Bill Polian is that, like many, I have preconceived notions. When I think about the paucity of African Americans that happen to be coaching in the sport of professional football, I hearken back to a quote that was attributed to Bill Walsh years ago in terms of the need for individuals to ingratiate themselves with us so we can get to know them better and things of that nature. When I talk to a Bill Polian, I'm talking to somebody that I view as an executive and as a teacher who is knowledgeable about his profession and knows what's needed. Bill, I don't know if we can necessarily get that from a lot of guys that are or have been in your positions or are in your positions. It seems to me like there's this penchant to bring people on board either that they're personally comfortable with or that they believe the owners would be comfortable with. How much credence do you give to that thinking, if any at all?
Well, there's some to it. There's a lot of truth to all of these statements. I don't, by the way, think people necessarily cast for race, for or against. The bottom line is that there are usually more than one person involved in a decision. It's rare when it's only one person. George Young had that. I had that in Indianapolis, but it's rare. So you get people who really don't understand what the game on the field is all about and have perhaps marketing concerns, have perhaps image concerns, have perhaps preconceived notions based on what they read or hear in the media. And they bring them into the mix and into the interview process things that really are extraneous. And oftentimes you don't get to the important stuff. Mm-hmm. And so two things have to happen, in my opinion. You're not going to change the makeup of who makes the decision. That's the owner's call. But we need to do a better job, as Bill Walsh did with the original Stanford project many, many years ago.
Yes.
We need to get minority coaches prepared for the interviews. That's the first thing we need to do. And that the committee on which I serve is working on that. We need to get them prepared for the interviews so they know that they have to present staff and they have to present good and solid staffs, that they know what questions they have to answer. They know they have to talk about the style of football they want. They know they have to set the vision for how they want the
Why
team
don't they
to
know
play.
that now, do you think?
Well, because assistant coaches and coordinators don't think that way. They're not in that mode. They're getting a game plan ready. They're not thinking about what my staff is going to be, so we got to help them do that.
Why is it that the white candidates don't need that same help?
They do.
They do.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone
sure.
across
Absolutely,
the
they
board.
do. Everyone across the board.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
White candidates interview just as poorly as black candidates or.
So in other words,
Hispanic.
because there are fewer minority candidates to begin with who are getting the opportunity,
That's the second
it's
part
even
of it.
more important that they are fully prepped for the opportunity.
That's the second part of it. We don't have enough minority quarterback coaches. We don't have enough minority coordinators. That's the second part of the puzzle. Right. And when we get that, and we're working toward it,
Bill,
we're trying to get the pipeline full.
How concerning is
What
it
resistance? I'm sorry. I wanted to know what resistance do you believe actually exists to that happening? What you just said about getting more minority quarterback coaches, more minority coordinators, etc. What's the impediment in that regard?
Number one, the growth process. They got to start at the college level. That's where most coaches start. Secondly, we got to get more quality control people on the offensive side of the ball who are minorities. That's where they start. Fill the pipeline, and at the other end, candidates will emerge.
So is it fair for somebody like me to look at the paucity of African American coaches in the sport of college football, particularly on a D1 level, and say that is contributing to the lack of black coaches on the NFL level? You're
Again,
not getting
to some
them.
degree, that's true.
You're not addressing that issue in college.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you feel that the Rooney Rule was the kind of necessary first step in order for this pipeline issue to even be an issue? In other words, first you need to make sure that minority candidates are even looked at, or has this been done backwards?
No, without question, the Rooney Rule was the most significant advancement in sports. Forget about just football, in sports for minorities. And it's been followed and replicated by other sports. Commissioner Tagliabue should be in the Hall of Fame for that alone. That alone.
Yeah.
So we had to have that. Now we got to grow the pipeline. That's really what it's all about.
The next step.
The next step. Yes.
No question.
Well,
But
in
regardless of
corporate
race, I find it concerning that owners don't know what they want in itself. What were you going to say, Stephen A.?
No, I was saying that in corporate America, what you have is a situation where it's mandated that there's a certain number of African Americans in particular professions that get accorded opportunities. I'm glad the Rooney Rule is in place. Please don't get me wrong. But I'm saying that the mandate that exists in corporate America, that doesn't seem applicable with the NFL as it pertains to the Rooney Rule. Do you have any issue with that whatsoever, Bill?
I think the Rooney Rule is great. It's been expanded to general managers, and it's been expanded to other front office positions, including for women. And I think that's the precursor to everything else. Once that's in place, and it is in place and has been for a long time, then we begin to take steps to make sure that the pipeline is full. It's not right now, to be very honest with you. It's not.
Really appreciate you joining us and your insight
Thank
on
you,
this.
sir.
My pleasure.
Bill.
We'll argue about the MVP some other time.
Yes.